A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Herman, sitting here in Jerusalem, you get used to a certain kind of background noise. It is not just the bells of the old city, or the calls to prayer echoing from the minarets, or the constant hum of traffic on Jaffa Street. It is the sound of languages crashing into each other, overlapping, and sometimes merging in ways that the textbooks never quite capture. I was thinking about this because our housemate Daniel was telling me about a conversation he had recently while he was out practicing his Arabic in East Jerusalem. He noticed something that really caught him off guard, a linguistic glitch in the matrix, so to speak. He was talking to a Palestinian friend about the oppressive summer heat, and the guy used the word mazgan for air conditioner. Now, for those who do not live here, mazgan is the modern Hebrew word for air conditioner. And Daniel was surprised, because there is a perfectly good standard Arabic word for cooling and air conditioning, mukayaf. It got him wondering why someone would reach for a Hebrew word in the middle of a perfectly fluent Arabic sentence. Is it a sign of a language losing its grip, or is it something much more sophisticated?
Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say, Daniel has hit on an absolute goldmine of sociolinguistic inquiry. It is funny he mentioned mazgan because that is the classic textbook example of this phenomenon. But once you train your ears to hear it, you realize it is everywhere. It is the linguistic wallpaper of the region. You hear people talking about the Ramzor, which is the traffic light, or the makhsom, the checkpoint, or even complex bureaucratic entities like Bituak Lumi, the National Insurance Office. It is a phenomenon called code switching, but in the context of Israel and Palestine, it is a very specific, highly asymmetric kind of code switching. We often talk about how modern Hebrew is full of Arabic loanwords, things like sababa for cool, akla for great, or jachnun for that delicious Yemenite bread, which have become totally integrated into Israeli slang. But the reverse flow, Hebrew into Arabic, is actually a much more complex structural story. It tells us a lot about how power, bureaucracy, technology, and daily survival shape the way we actually speak. It is not just about words, it is about the architecture of the world we inhabit.
It is fascinating because most people assume language is this static, precious thing you learn from a dusty grammar book. But here in Jerusalem, it is more like a fluid. It is constantly seeking the path of least resistance. And I think it is worth framing this right at the start for our listeners. We are not just talking about people who do not know their own language. That is a common and, quite frankly, lazy misconception. People think code switching happens because someone forgot a word or because they are uneducated. But the linguistic research suggests the exact opposite. Code switching is actually a sign of high linguistic competence. You have to understand the deep nuances of both systems to weave them together so seamlessly that the listener barely notices the seam. Today, we really want to dig into the mechanics of why this happens. Why does the minority language in a context zone start absorbing the vocabulary of the dominant language? And what does that tell us about the future of these languages? Are we looking at the birth of a new dialect, or is this just a temporary pragmatic tool used to navigate a complicated life?
And to do that, we should probably distinguish right away between lexical borrowing and code switching, because they are often confused. Lexical borrowing is when a word like mazgan becomes a permanent integrated part of the vocabulary, where the speaker might not even perceive it as foreign anymore. It is like how English borrowed the word café from French or balcony from Italian. We do not think of ourselves as speaking French when we say we are going to a café, but code switching is more of a performance. It is a situational, often subconscious shift. When an Arabic speaker uses a Hebrew term for a government form or a specific piece of technology, they are often navigating a specific world, the world of the Israeli state, the Israeli economy, or the Israeli legal system. We actually touched on some of the history of how modern Hebrew itself was engineered to handle these modern concepts back in episode 1037, when we talked about the shift from scrolls to software. Hebrew had to be built from the ground up to be a modern language, and in a way, that engineered precision makes it very sticky for other languages in the region that are dealing with the same modern infrastructure.
That stickiness is a great way to put it. So, let us get into the meat of this. Why Hebrew into Arabic? If you look at the socio-political landscape, Hebrew is the language of the state, the language of the high-tech sector, and the language of the military and the bureaucracy. In linguistics, we often call this the prestige language or the superstrate language. When two languages are in contact and one holds more institutional power, the words for the way things work tend to flow from the dominant language to the minority language. Herman, you have looked into the matrix language frame model. How does that help us understand what is actually happening in a sentence where someone mixes these two? Because it is not just a random salad of words, right?
Not at all. The Matrix Language Frame Model, or MLF, was proposed by the linguist Carol Myers-Scotton back in 1993, and it remains the gold standard for understanding this. Basically, the model posits that in any code switch sentence, there is a matrix language that provides the grammatical structure, the syntax, the word order, and the little functional words like the, is, of, and verb endings. Then there is the embedded language that provides what we call content morphemes, the big, heavy nouns and verbs that carry the specific meaning. So if an Arabic speaker says, I need to go to the makhsom, the matrix language is Arabic. The grammar is Arabic. The sentence structure is Arabic. But they embed the Hebrew word makhsom because that word carries a specific weight or a specific technical meaning in their daily life that the Arabic equivalent might not capture as precisely in that specific context. In the MLF model, the matrix language is the boss. It sets the rules. The embedded language just provides the specialized tools.
So it is not a breakdown of grammar. It is more like the Arabic provides the skeleton, and the Hebrew provides the specific tools or objects being discussed. But I wonder about the cognitive load there. Does it actually make it easier for the speaker? If you are working in an Israeli office all day or dealing with Israeli authorities, your brain is already primed for those Hebrew terms. When you go home and talk to your family, reaching for the formal Arabic word for national insurance might actually be harder than just saying Bitua Kolomi. It is almost like a path of least resistance for the brain, right? A way to save mental energy.
It is absolutely a path of least resistance. There is this concept in psycholinguistics called lexical retrieval. If the Hebrew word is the one you use in 90% of your professional or civic interactions, it is the one that is at the top of the deck in your mind. But there is also a prestige element that we cannot ignore. Sometimes using the Hebrew term signals a certain kind of worldliness or a connection to the modern economy. It is very similar to how people in the global tech industry, whether they are in Berlin, Tokyo, or Tel Aviv, will use English words like deploy, sprint, or backlog. They could translate them into German or Japanese, but the English word carries a specific professional identity and a precise technical meaning that the translation lacks. In the case of Hebrew and Arabic here, it is even more intense because the contact is daily, physical, and often mandatory. You are walking through the streets, you are seeing the signs, you are dealing with the bureaucracy. The Hebrew words become the tags for those specific experiences.
That makes total sense for things like bureaucracy or technology. But what about something like mazgan? An air conditioner is just a household appliance. It is not a government form. Why would that word cross over when an Arabic speaker has a perfectly good word like mukayyaf? This is where I think it gets really interesting. It is about the environment of the object. If you bought the air conditioner in an Israeli store like Maseni Hashmal, if the technician who installed it was speaking Hebrew, and if the manual and the remote control are in Hebrew, the object itself becomes coded as Hebrew in your mind. It is not just a generic cooling machine, it is a mazgan. The language of the marketplace colonizes the domestic space.
That is a brilliant point, Korn. The object carries the language of its origin or its marketplace, and we see this in certain populations more than others. For example, Palestinian citizens of Israel, who are often referred to as Israeli Arabs in the census, tend to code switch much more frequently than Palestinians in the West Bank or Gaza. Why? because their integration into the Israeli economy, education system, and healthcare system is much deeper. They are navigating Hebrew language universities, Hebrew language hospitals, and Hebrew language courtrooms every single day. For them, code switching is not just a habit, it is a survival mechanism. It is a way of being bicultural and bilingual in a way that is functional. It is not that they are losing their Arabic remains rich and poetic. It is that they are expanding their toolkit to navigate a complex asymmetric environment where Hebrew is the language of the system.
You mentioned asymmetric, and I think that is the key word for this entire discussion. We have to be honest about the direction of the flow. While Hebrew speakers use Arabic slang for cool or bro or let's go, they almost never use Arabic words for technical, bureaucratic, or institutional concepts. You do not hear a Hebrew speaker using an Arabic word for tax return, or microprocessor, or summons. The flow of technical and institutional language is almost entirely one way, from Hebrew to Arabic. This reflects the stark reality of who is building the infrastructure and who is managing the state. It is a linguistic map of the power dynamics on the ground. As conservatives, we often talk about the importance of a strong, coherent state culture, and you see that playing out in the language. The state language becomes the language of utility, the language of getting things done.
It really does. And this brings us to one of the questions Daniel had in his prompt, which is how this differs from a pidgin or a Creole. This is where people often get confused, especially if they are not linguistics nerds. They hear this mixing and they think, oh, they are speaking a new language, like Spanglish or something. But linguistically, what is happening here is fundamentally different from the birth of a Creole. A pidgin usually develops when two groups who share no common language need to communicate for basic trade. It has a very simplified grammar and a very limited vocabulary. A Creole happens when that pidgin becomes the first language of a new generation, and the grammar becomes complex and standardized again. But in Israel and Palestine, we have two incredibly old, incredibly stable, and highly literary languages, Hebrew and Arabic. Neither of these languages is going anywhere. They both have massive bodies of literature, religious texts, and formal education systems that act as anchors.
Right, so it is not a breakdown of language. It is more like a layering. A Palestinian speaker in Haifa or Jaffa is not speaking a simplified version of either. They are speaking a highly sophisticated Arabic that has been updated with Hebrew lexical items to reflect their modern urban reality. It is a stable form of bilingualism. It is not a transition toward a third language. If you look at something like Singlish in Singapore, which is a mix of English, Malay, and various Chinese dialects, that has started to develop its own unique grammatical markers that do not exist in any of the parent languages. We do not really see that happening here. The Arabic grammar remains stubbornly, beautifully Arabic. You might take a Hebrew verb and conjugate it using Arabic rules, which is actually hilarious to hear if you know both languages, but the rules of the sentence are still dictated by the Arabic matrix.
I love that you mentioned the conjugation. That is one of my favorite parts of this linguistic dance. You will hear people take a Hebrew root like lahazmin, which means to invite or to order, and force it into an Arabic verb pattern. It shows how the human brain tries to maintain structural integrity while being pragmatically flexible. But to Daniel's point about whether this becomes a legitimate derivative language, the answer is usually no, as long as the parent languages remain strong and the poles of the culture remain in place. As long as there is an Arab world that speaks Arabic and a Jewish world that speaks Hebrew, the code switching will remain a bridge, not a new island. It is a performance that happens in the contact zone, but the actors go home to their respective linguistic foundations.
It is a bridge that only some people can cross, though. It is interesting to think about the monoglot versus the bilingual speaker. We talked about this in episode 1043, the idea of the last monoglot being the anchor for a language. In this case, the Arabic speakers are becoming increasingly bilingual out of necessity, while the Hebrew speakers, despite Arabic having a special status in the state, remain largely monolingual, at least in terms of their daily functional speech. This creates a fascinating cognitive asymmetry. The person who is code switching actually has a broader perspective. They are able to navigate both worlds, while the person who only speaks the dominant language is often blind to the linguistic richness and the complex negotiations happening right in front of them. The code switcher is the one with the more complex map of reality.
That is so true. And if we look at the socio-political implications, this code switching can be seen as a form of linguistic pragmatism. In a region as contested and as bureaucratic as this, being able to speak the language of the state is a form of power. It is a way to get things done, to navigate the hospital, to deal with the tax office, to understand your rights. But there is also a tension there. There are linguistic purists on both sides who absolutely hate this. You have Arabic scholars in Cairo or Amman who see the influx of Hebrew words as a form of cultural erosion, a kind of linguistic occupation, and you have Hebrew purists who want to keep the language clean of any foreign influence. But language does not care about ideological purity. Language cares about utility. If mazgan is the word that gets the air conditioner fixed in the middle of a heat wave, that is the word people are going to use.
It is the ultimate free market, isn't it? Words compete for space based on how useful they are. And in a high-contact environment like Jerusalem, that competition is fierce. I think we should talk a bit about the prestige of certain domains. We mentioned technology and bureaucracy, but what about the military? That is a huge one here. Because so much of life in Israel is touched by the security apparatus, military Hebrew terms have flooded into Palestinian Arabic. Words like tauda for ID card, or hazmana for a summons, or even cheshbon for a bill or an account. These are not just words, they are symbols of a specific type of interaction. When you use the Hebrew word for a summons in an Arabic sentence, you are signaling that this is an interaction with the Israeli state, not a private matter between friends. The language itself carries the flavor of the authority.
Precisely. It is about domain-specific language. We see this in the United States with Spanglish, where Spanish speakers might use English terms for things related to work, taxes, or school, the public sphere, but switch back to pure Spanish for family, religion, and food, the private sphere. The private sphere is the last stronghold of the native tongue. In the public sphere, the dominant language encroaches. But what is unique about the Hebrew-Arabic situation is the sheer depth of the historical and linguistic connection between the two. They are both Semitic languages. They share a massive amount of root structures and grammatical logic. This actually makes it much easier for the languages to borrow from each other. The packaging fits better. When you take a Hebrew word and put an Arabic suffix on it, it often sounds more natural than if you tried to do that with, say, English and Chinese. The friction of code switching is much lower here.
That is a great technical point. The morphological compatibility makes the friction of code switching much lower. It is like two different sets of Lego that happen to use the same size studs. You can click them together without needing an adapter, and I think that is why it feels so seamless to the people doing it. They are not thinking, "Now I am speaking Hebrew." They are just reaching for the most effective tool in their shared Semitic toolbox. It is actually a very efficient way to communicate in a world that is already fragmented.
It is incredibly efficient. But we should also address the attrition aspect, because it is not all just bonus vocabulary. This was something we covered way back in episode 799, The Science of First Language Attrition. When you are constantly code switching, does your original language start to weaken? Do you lose the ability to find the pure Arabic word for air conditioner? For some people, the answer is yes. If you never use the word mukayef, eventually it might take you a few extra milliseconds to remember it. That cognitive lag is real. And over generations, if a community is entirely bilingual, the original words for certain modern objects can actually disappear from the local dialect entirely. At that point, it is no longer code switching. It has become a permanent loanword. It is written in permanent ink.
That is the permanent ink we talked about. Some things get written into the language so deeply they cannot be erased. But it is also worth noting that this happens in reverse too, just in different domains. Think about the way Israelis talk about a hafla for a party, or being medsud for being happy, or saying yalla to get moving. Those are Arabic words that have been written into the permanent ink of modern Hebrew. It is just that the domains are different. Hebrew takes the saw, the slang, and the street cred from Arabic, while Arabic takes the structure, the utility, and the bureaucracy from Hebrew. It is a trade, but it is an unequal trade because of the institutional weight of the state. It is a linguistic reflection of the high-tech versus traditional divide that often defines the region.
I think that is the most important takeaway for anyone trying to understand this. If you are listening to people speak in Jerusalem, Jaffa, or Haifa, you are not hearing a language falling apart. You are hearing a language adapting to the reality of the 21st century in a very specific, very intense geopolitical context. It is a sign of resilience, really. It is the ability of the Palestinian community to integrate the language of the state without losing the core identity of their own tongue. They are keeping the matrix of their culture intact while importing the content they need to survive and thrive in a Hebrew-speaking economy. It is a high-functioning linguistic tool for navigation.
It is a sophisticated balancing act, and it really challenges the simplistic idea that one language equals one identity. In a place like this, identities are layered, and language is the most visible sign of that layering. You can be a proud Palestinian, a speaker of a rich literary Arabic, and still use the word mazgan because you are also a participant in the modern Israeli marketplace. The language reflects the reality of the life being lived. It is not an either-or situation. It is a both-and situation. And I think we can all learn something from that. We should all look for the prestige words in our own local dialects. What are the words we borrow from other cultures to describe things we think are better or more modern?
Whether it is using French words for cooking or English words for software, we are all code switchers to some degree. But here in Jerusalem, the stakes are just a bit higher and the history is a bit deeper. We should probably start wrapping this up, but I want to leave people with a thought about the future. As technology continues to advance, and as the Israeli tech scene continues to be the primary engine of innovation in the region, I expect we will see even more Hebrew technical terms entering the Arabic lexicon. It is just the nature of the beast. Language follows the money and the power.
I agree. The gravity of the high-tech sector is just too strong to resist. But it will be interesting to see if the reverse ever happens in the technical sense. Probably not as long as the current power structures remain, but language has a way of surprising us. Anyway, this has been a deep dive into something that Daniel noticed just by paying attention to the world around him. It is a good reminder to keep your ears open. You can learn a lot about the world just by listening to how people talk about their air conditioners. It is the small details that tell the big stories.
And if you've been enjoying these deep dives into the weird and the wonky, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app. Whether you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, those ratings really do help more people find the show. It makes a big difference for us, especially as we approach episode 1040.
It really does. We love doing this, and the community we have built around these prompts is incredible. So, thanks for being part of it. You can find all our past episodes, including the ones we mentioned today, about the engineering of Hebrew and language attrition at our website, myweirdprompts.com. We have got the full archive there, plus an RSS feed for the subscribers.
And of course, we are on Spotify as well. Just search for My Weird Prompts. We want to give a quick shout out to Daniel for sending in this observation. It is these kinds of real-world glitches in language that make for the best discussions. It is amazing how much depth there is in a single word like mazgan.
It really is. Well, Herman, I think I need to go turn on my own mazgan now. It is getting a bit warm in here, and I can feel my own cognitive load increasing.
Fair enough. I will go back to my research on Semitic root structures. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been My Weird Prompts.
We will catch you in the next one. Stay curious, Jerusalem.
Until next time.
You know, Herman, before we totally sign off, I was thinking about the mazgan thing one more time. There is something almost poetic about it. It is a word that was basically invented by linguists in the 20th century to revive a dead language, and now it is being used by people whose ancestors have lived here for 1,000 years. It is like the word itself is a bridge across time, as well as across cultures.
That is a great way to put it. Modern Hebrew is such a constructed language in many ways, but once it is out in the wild, it becomes a natural force. It is like a species that was brought back from extinction and is now successfully colonizing the surrounding ecosystem. It is not just occupying space, it is filling a niche that was empty. And the fact that Arabic speakers find it useful enough to adopt is the ultimate proof of its success as a living language. It is the triumph of the pragmatic over the ideological.
It is the ultimate validation. In a weird way, if people are willing to use your words, it means your words have value. It means they are helping people describe their reality better than the words they had before. That is all language ever is. A set of tools for describing reality. And if the reality of the Middle East is one of high-tech innovation and bureaucratic complexity, then the language is going to reflect that, whether the purists like it or not.
And I think that is a lesson that applies to a lot more than just linguistics. We see it in economics, we see it in technology, and we see it in how societies actually function on the ground, away from the headlines. People find a way to make it work. They find a way to communicate. They find a way to cool their houses, even if they have to borrow a word to do it.
Well said, Herman. Well said. All right, for real this time, let us get out of here.
Agreed. This has been a long one, but a good one. Thanks again to everyone for sticking with us through the technical weeds.
Take care, everyone. We will be back soon with another one of Daniel's weird prompts.
Herman Poppleberry, signing off.
And Corn Bubbleberry, heading for the air conditioning. See you later.
Wait, Corn, you did not just say you were heading for the mazgan, did you?
I might have. It is a very sticky word, Herman. Very sticky.
It really is. I will see you at the house.
See you there.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
One more thing, Corn. Did you know the word mazgan actually comes from the Hebrew root for temperament, or mixture? Like mazegavir, the mixing of air.
I did not know that. So it is literally the mixer.
It is about balance, which is exactly what we have been talking about all day, the balance between two languages.
That is perfect. A perfect note to end on. The linguistic mixer.
All right, now we are really done.
Done.
See you.
See you.
This has been My Weird Prompts, episode 1037.
Actually, it is episode 1038, I think.
No, I checked the log. 1037.
I will take your word for it. You are the one with the spreadsheets.
Guilty as charged. Bye for now.
Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show.